Good morning, Kensington. How are you doing this morning?
Wait a minute, the 9 o'clock
the
had
9
a little more
a.m.
energy.
lived up to the reputation of being the more rowdy service. Is
So
11
come
a.m.
on,
is
11.
rowdy?
Good
No?
morning.
Good morning, 11 a.m. You know what? I heard the reputation of the 11 a.m. service is that it's the best looking service.
Yeah. They
So
have more time to get ready.
Yeah, they're more pampered and yeah, they're looking good. Well, hey, welcome. My name is Drew.
I'm Charlotte.
And we have some fun, exciting ways to connect this morning that we're really excited about.
We are really excited. If you look around the auditorium, you see some flag signs that we put out because, I've been around this place for a while. Most of you have seen me. I've talked to a lot of you, and I hear some common themes when I talk to you, and that is people who say, I love this place, but I'm still working on feeling like I have a connection, like I belong, like it's my family and my home. And then the other thing I hear is, I really do believe I have faith in Jesus, but I'm trying to figure out how to grow that faith. Like, what does that look like? And we believe here at Kensington that one of the best ways to connect with other people and to grow in your faith is by jumping into a group. So, in the next couple of weeks, we're kicking off a whole bunch of groups that you could be a part of. So, if we have the screen, we're trying to make it easy for you because we have so many things to offer, but we don't want to overwhelm you. So, if you pull out your phone and type that number in, 248-845-3058, and you just type the word groups, it will send you a link right to your phone to our groups page. And that lists all of the things that we're trying to make sure that you know about. I'm super excited. On Monday nights, if you haven't heard or checked out our Alpha group, we meet on Mondays, we share dinner, we watch a video together, and then we have group discussion around topics that everybody's thinking about. Like, why am I really here? Does the Bible really have relevance today? Does prayer really matter? All these questions around the Christian faith that you really can have some conversation around. So that's just one of our courses actually that are over here. In addition, on Monday nights, we have a Bible basics course for people who really want to take the intimidation away from approaching the Bible. And then we have a workshop for people who are like, I want to engage with God, but I need some practices in my life that help me do that. So those are just a little snapshot of some of the things that we have here on Monday nights. On Tuesday nights is our care night.
Oof.
We have Celebrate Recovery. Maybe it's healing that you need. Maybe you need a place to come for just some healing of your hurts and your hang-ups and your habits that are stopping you from connecting and growing. Or we have a grief share that happens, and that is a group that goes without explanation, that some of us need to experience connection and healing in that area. So we have Tuesday nights for you to experience care. And then all along here are some other groups that are men, women, couples, families, singles, where you can connect with people and either do a Bible study or a book club or something that's going to help you build those relationships, those connections, and also really have those conversations where someone knows your stuff and you're growing with them. So please text that number. Find a group that fits for you. 2023 might be your time to say, I'm going to try something. I keep saying I want to connect. Now's the time.
Yeah, and the reason why you need to join a group is because the only way your life changes is when you get to talk about your life, the things that matter to you, and transformation just naturally happens. Well, I think there's another way they can connect with us throughout the week during this series.
Yes, this series right now is ID Renewal. And this is the series we're in right now, and the discipleship team has developed a devotional that can be sent right to your phone. So I'm going to ask you again to consider joining this text group. It's a different phone number. This number, 248-781-2757, if you just type the word identity. What you'll do is you'll get maybe 3 or 4 times in the week just a little prompt that's going to help you walk through a deeper dive into what you're going to hear Craig teach about today, about identity and rooting your identity in Christ. And maybe there'll be a prayer exercise or some scripture to read or even a song to listen to. We want you to be continually growing throughout the week and being reminded that it's not just on Sunday that you can pursue these ways to grow in your faith. So make sure you join that. I've been enjoying them this week. I love diving in and saying, oh yeah, this is that reminder to dive into this material. So don't miss out on that.
Love it.
Just a couple more weeks.
And honestly, speaking of community, we have launched a new young adults ministry here. We've shifted the date to be Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. And honestly, the number one reason I hear every young adult say the reason why they show up to come is because they're looking for a spouse. Sorry, I meant friendship.
Friendship with others.
And so come find Friendship Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Honestly, it's been super fun getting to know some people. I will also be standing over there at the 1829 Young Adults table. If you want to have a conversation with me at the end of service, I'd love to connect you in.
So you guys will be meeting this Wednesday?
Yes, this Wednesday.
Tell your friends, 18 to 29.
Your young people, yes. And we
you guys check ID? Like if I showed up, would you turn me away?
Yeah, sometimes we do.
Probably.
We just check the driver's license. I'd have to kick myself out, but all of it to say, we also have an Instagram handle if you want to follow it. We'd love to have you. Well, hey, we also have a really special event that's happening through our Hope Water Project. It's a gala where you get dressed up, there's a plated dinner, and a silent auction to raise money for clean water for the Pokot people in Kenya. But hey, don't hear it from me, hear it from our event thrower, Erin Brissett. Check out this video and what she has to say.
Sometimes we look at an incredible need that pulls at our hearts, and we think, I have to do something. I will work and strive and help with everything I am and have. Hope Water Project has this kind of mission. When you see how lives are transformed by clean water in these dry, harsh regions of Kenya, you know that this is one of the most valuable things that you can do with your life. But here's the thing, we can bring about life change and we can invest in this incredible mission without breaking a sweat. Because we don't just run at Hope Water Project. We also hold highly entertaining galas with delicious food and entertainment. So you can come decked out and have an incredible evening while impacting thousands of people in need of clean water. A win-win for sure. Let me tell you about our last Hope Water Project Gala event in January of 22. This was a very classy event, which welcomed more than 200 big-hearted and well-dressed attendees. It included entertainment by Detroit Sound, a delicious plated dinner, mocktails by Birdie Bar, 50 auction items, memorable stories, and vision from Steve Andrews and Craig McGlasson. This incredible evening alone raised about $140,000, which means entire villages and legacies are changing. With clean water, health, education, church, and community become possible. So come get gussied up for a really good cause. We're holding our second annual Hope Water Project Gala on January 27th. Tickets are available at hopewaterproject.org. Can't wait to see you there.
Gussied up.
Yeah, I love my girl.
Up,
I love my girl Erin, but who says gussied up? Anyone here say gussied up?
Someone does.
That's like an old term. It like went extinct.
That
and now we're
actually takes place
it.
right
Oh
here in the
gosh.
auditorium, you guys. This place is transformed into a beautiful space for this gala. I hope you can consider coming.
Yeah, and the Detroit Youth Choir, which was featured on America's Got Talent, that got the golden buzzer from Terry Crews himself and got second place on the show.
Did anybody see that? The America's
here
Got Talent
performing.
Detroit. Yeah, they're going to be here.
They're going to be performing along with Kaleo Kids. It's going to be a very entertaining night. So please go register at kensingtonchurch.org/gala. Well, hey, speaking of Hope Water Project, we work in the country of Kenya, and we actually have a very exciting men's trip to Kenya called Man Up, and we're going to bring up Charles. Can we give it up for Charles as he approaches the stage? Now, where are all the guys at? Can I get a yeah? Yeah, it's my dogs right there. Charles, please explain just a little bit of what you're going to be doing over there in Kenya on this trip.
Good morning, Orion. My name is Charles Sullivan. I work on staff here at the Orion campus, and I am leading a trip to Kenya. So this is all men's trip, so I'm talking to the guys in the room. It's going to be an incredible trip. We get to go to Kenya, go visit the Pokot, spend some time with them. We get to go on a water walk. We get to see some wells assessment, some being drilled. There's a lot to do on this trip, and it's an incredible opportunity for us guys to kind of go on a trip and just get together and have a good time. So anyone who's interested in this trip, I'm going to be out in the hub, and I could tell you a lot more about it at the hub if you're interested in going, and hope to see you there.
Yes, bro, thanks. Can we get it for Charles? I can take that from you. Yeah, honestly, it's the most transformational trip I've seen for men. Honestly, I mean, they've done a Man Up Israel trip, so please go visit the hub. Well, hey, I want to invite you to stand because we're actually about to enter into a moment of a couple songs of worship. And I don't know if you're like me, but I feel like it's so easy for us to maybe feel like in life we're stuck. Maybe it's a career move. Maybe it's a life stage of your family. Maybe it's a place in your soul of an emotional state that you've been living in. And I feel like it's easy for us to all wait for that season of breakthrough, to wait on what God might do in us. But the thing with worship is it's kind of the same thing. It's like we wait to be inspired to engage with God. We wait to feel the music in the moment. But I think there's something that happens when we're brave and choose to enter into a moment with God, even when we're not feeling it, even if we're not ready to, that we decide to say, hey, God, I want to engage with you. I want to have connection and intimacy with you. So we're going to sing the song Move, about how God can move and do things that no one else can do.
let worship turn in. Lord, lead us back to you. Sing so come, move, let justice roll like a river. Let worship turn in. Lord, lead us back to you.
Reminded the highest king would welcome me. I was lost, but he brought me in. His love for me. His love for me. Who the sun sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, He has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While
Hey, go ahead and say hi to somebody before you sit down. Just let them know you're glad that they're here, you're here. Hope they have a great day and week. I'm calling audible. Just go with me.
Do I need to stand up here with this mic? Okay.
So I was thinking while you guys are singing, if church is like a new experience for you, this is one of the few places where you gather as a whole group of people and usually opens up with everybody in the room being asked to sing together. Like, so in some ways, that's not necessarily a very normal experience, right? Because you're not gonna go into work tomorrow morning and start off your day, okay, everybody, let's sing the songs of what we believe about our company. Like, it's just not gonna happen. And so if you're like a friend of mine years ago, I remember him coming to church, never been to church, long time, and he just looked at me during the music. He's like, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know, you can sing if you want to sing. And so I just always love to take a moment and point out part of what we do that for is that when we're gathering together, we're not just trying to go through a religious motion of church, we're trying to have an encounter with God. Y'all have got too many things to do in your lives to just come here and go through a routine. Part of what we long for when we gather together as a community like this is that we would encounter God in a different way, in a unique way than maybe we expect or will throughout the rest of the week. And in that setting, I always think it's important then that we acknowledge truth about who God is, who we are, who one another is. And one way to do that is through song, is to sing those truths out. You know, I mean, because we could do a couple things. You hate it when I pull an audible and make you do something. You're like, I don't know why you made me stay up here. So we could do a song like that. The truths of that song: I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. Like if I led you right now to let's just all stand and say that together. It kind of feels almost weird, doesn't it? Like it could even feel a little cultish almost. Like sometimes if you're saying like things together all the time and like there's just more of a weird. But when you sing it, that's why you're up here. I don't know. Just pick a line from the song. Just go. I know. I'm just keeping you on your toes.
Girl lead, man. Hey, thank you. This isn't even on.
Well, turn your mic on.
It's not up to me. It's up to. There you go. Thanks, man. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am.
And that's so much more beautiful than me just saying it and we sang it together, right? That we sing it and we let the rhythm of our voices acknowledge the truth of existence, of God, of me, of you, of one another. So that's totally what I made you stay up here for. So everyone's like, what is McGlasson doing today? Why is he doing this? And in that song, I don't know if you picked it up, it's all about the series. It's all about identity. You know, I am a child of God. I am who you say I am. And that one particular line, I am a child of God. I'm also aware in a room this size, where's my online people? And with all of you watching online, that's not true for everybody. Not all of you believe that you are a child of God yet. Some of you are in process. You're trying to figure out, is there even a God? Who is God? Like, am I a child of God's? And so I get it. We're in different places. Some of you are here to acknowledge that. Like you sing that because you believe that. That is a part of your identity. I mean, we're singing it because that's a series, identity. Some of you are like, I don't know. I don't know if there is a God. And if there is a God, I don't know if that's my identity. And I just want to say to you, if that's part of even your wrestle as you sit here and you see words on the screen that don't represent you yet, that's okay. Know this, like God is so graciously, lovingly, passionately pursuing you so that you will know one day you're a child of His. This morning, even on my way in, like short moment of just my day and my week, a little bit of my ADD brain here, I'm like super competitive, so everything becomes a competition to me. So as I'm driving in, I live in Sterling Heights, so I'm driving west. So in my rearview mirror, I don't know if you saw the sunrise today, super beautiful, but I can see the sunrise coming up in my rearview mirror, super dark out in front of me. And here's the bizarre competitive part of me. I'm like driving and I'm seeing the sun like catch up to me. I'm like, not today, sunshine. I'm getting to Orion before you do. And like within minutes, like the whole sky in front of me started lighting up as well. And I just think I'm like quirky enough that that's how God has to get my attention to talk. And I literally felt like as I was driving this morning, I feel like God just kind of whispered into my head this thought and this idea. He said, you'll never outrun the sun. You'll never outrun the light. And I just want you to know, if you're here and you're like, I don't know about these lyrics, I don't know about these words, I don't know, as we're talking about identity, that I would say my identity is in Christ, just know this, you'll never outrun Him. He's coming not after you in a vengeful, angry, hateful way, but in a tender way. I shared first service that my daughter plays soccer and smacked her head recently on a goalpost, pretty good injury. She's the keeper. So we've been trying to figure out why she's getting headaches. We had an MRI appointment yesterday. You are the spitting image of me in every way and personality type. And so we're walking in, and this is what I would do. When I'm nervous, I'm a little scared, I don't want anybody near me. I don't want anybody touching me. I just kind of withdraw. And so my wife and I went to put our arms around her yesterday a little bit, and she's like, get off me. And I'm like, no, get over here. And so I put my arm around her, and she's pushing, and I'm pulling in, and she's pushing. And I said a moment, I said, listen, I know you're nervous. I know you're scared about this whole thing. So either talk to me about what you're feeling or let me put my arm around you. And then you finally, you kind of nestled in and let me hug in and have a moment. Here's why I tell you that, because that's God. When I say he's pursuing, when I say you can't outrun the light, that's God. Like his purpose of pursuit of you is for no other reason than to put his arm around you and begin to teach you you are his. And he adores you and what it means to live out his identity. So this morning, so many things about this weekend, from what God says in a simple moment of sunshine to the songs here to even the way our country will pause tomorrow are reflective of identity. You know this as well as I do. Tomorrow, our entire country is going to pause for a minute in the kind of moment to acknowledge and to celebrate the life of Martin Luther King Jr. And I think it's fitting then that we would take a moment here today and pause as well for the man, but particularly for the mission that he stood for and what his life was about. I think sometimes, especially in the last couple of years, anybody else feel like we have taken things that are kingdom things and we have turned them into something other than kingdom that then creates weird feelings or divisions or angst or, well, you know what Martin Luther King stood for were kingdom beliefs and kingdom values. What he lived for and what ultimately he lost his life for was for kingdom work. There's a quote that a friend of mine shared with me recently. I think it's so fitting to this day and this series as we talk about being made in the image of God. This is something he once said. The whole concept of the Imago Dei, as expressed in Latin, meaning the image of God, is the idea that all men have something within them that God injected, that every man has a capacity to have fellowship then with God. And this gives him a uniqueness, it gives him a worth, and it gives him a dignity among all creation. And we must never forget this as a nation. There are no levels in the image of God, no one greater, no one lesser. We know one day, we will know one day that God made us to live together as brothers and to respect the dignity and the worth of every man. One of my favorite pictures in the Bible of what's to yet come for us as followers of Jesus, the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, was given to a man named John as a part of a forecasting of where all of this is one day going. And this is part of what he says. After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from every tribe, from every people, from every language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And they were wearing white robes, and they were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." This is where all of this is one day headed, is to an incredible, powerful, beautiful mosaic of every nation, every tongue, every tribe. And I love how it specifically even says every language. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but as we stand one day in the face and in the presence of God, when we sing in all of our diversity, we're also singing in our native language and tongue. And you'll hear it and you'll understand it, which I think is going to be amazing. There's no division. There's no I don't know what that means because it's not the language I speak. We're going to understand all of it, but you're going to hear God praised one day in Portuguese, in Latin, in Hebrew, in German, in Russian. That just happened, right? And you'll understand it one day. It's happening one day. All of that diversity is coming around the throne. And here's what I think. If that is the end that God is taking all of this to, is the unity of his people impressed with his Imago Dei, then it must be the work of his people now and here in this day. And so that's why we pause. It's why we pause tomorrow, and it's why we take a minute even in the service to acknowledge today. So the next song that we're gonna do is again, it's a continuation of identity and who we've been made to be. Now, Brad, who's gonna come out and sing this, there's kind of two parts to the song, and you'll notice there's gonna be a big break in the middle. And so what I want you to do is I want you to listen in at the first part as if it's somebody almost wrestling with God and trying to understand, how do I be with you? Like even believing you love me, God. I don't know how to do this and be with you and do life with you. And then the second part of the song, as if it's God speaking back, not just to the person in the song, but to you, with the promise that here's all you need to know, is I'm not going anywhere. I will be with you, I will walk with you, and I will teach you how to walk with me.
You say that you love me, don't say that you love me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. You say that you want me, don't say that you want me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. I still act like an orphan, I guess, and my heart breaks to confess that even while you hold me as I cry on the floor, I still don't know how to be yours. You say that you love me, don't say that you love me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. You say that you want me, don't say that you want me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. I still act like an orphan, I guess, and my heart breaks to confess that even while you hold me as I cry on the floor, I still don't know how to be yours. So love me or hate me, I'm not going anywhere. Leave me or take me, you still build my signature. You know me and I see nor forgotten. I'm not walking out on you. So love me or hate me, I'm not going anywhere. Leave me or take me, you still bear my signature. Know me and I seen or forgot. I'm not walking out on you. So love me or hate me, I'm not going anywhere. Leave me or take me, you still build my signature.
think the lyrics of that song are worth just sitting in for another minute. So I actually want to start. I want to read some of what Brad just sang, and I want you to kind of put yourself in a moment where, if you can, imagine God saying these words to you. It's not just a song. It's not just beautifully sung. Imagine this is the actual voice of God, and he's speaking these words to you. Whatever resistance, whatever barrier, whatever brokenness, you know it, he knows it, and yet still, imagine these words. You can love me or hate me, but I'm not going anywhere. You can love me, leave me, or take me, but you still bear my signature. You can know me or not, but I'm not going anywhere. You can love me or you can hate me, but I'm not walking out on you. I think much of life it's an attempt to form a kind of identity for ourselves that does a few things. Number one, it gives us a sense of purpose and meaning. It kind of validates your life, like why you're here. And so whether that's your job or whether that's a certain thing about your characteristics or maybe it's something about your physique. Like we try to develop certain identity that just says like, this is who I am, gives me purpose, it gives me meaning. But then I think part of what we also attempt to do in forming an identity is draw people towards us, is keep people liking us and in relationship with us. I have yet to meet the human being, I'm sure they exist, but they're outliers, that says I'm living my life to repel everybody I want no relationship. Right? All of us live life wanting to be loved, wanting to be liked, wanting people drawn towards us. And there's a hope and a belief that the right personality, the right identity will do that. And we all want different levels of people in terms of relationship. We all don't want the same. Like when I say that, some of you are like, I don't like lots of people, I'm more introverted. But you know, everybody is kind of like, I heard it said once, you're kind of like a Lego block. You know how Lego blocks, you have the really small ones that have 4 connection points. You have others that have 8 and then 12. You have the big plates that are like 36. You know, every dot is the ability to connect with a different person. Some of you are like a 4-dot Lego block. Some of you are 8, some of you are 32, but all of us long for connection and relationship in life. And there's a belief and an idea that the right identity keeps people. But here's what's interesting. I think all of humanity also lives with a certain subtle fear that if we don't maintain the right kind of identity, then we'll be found out as posers, as less than, as incapable, as whatever, fill in the blank, and then we'll lose relationship with people. So we have to maintain the right kind of identity to keep people in our lives, to keep relationship. Now, for the follower of Jesus, the pursuit isn't in life to try and find your identity, to form your identity, but to fall into your identity in Christ, that he has your identity. That's what we believe. That he actually has your identity, and to know to the fullest measure who you were made to be is to know him, is to walk with him, is to discover your identity with him. But it's no less of a struggle. Because all throughout our lives, there are moments and situations and pain and messaging that attempts to rob us of who God made us to be. Messaging like the woman I've talked to throughout the series that said her entire life growing up, all her mom ever communicated to her was, you're fat and you're dumb. Or a young man I just spoke with last week that said his entire relationship with his dad before he passed away was defined in one statement: you'll never amount to anything. You're not good enough for that. There's just ways that there's certain messaging gets into our lives. Even as a follower of Jesus who is trying to form you with his imago Dei image, there's certain messaging that has the power to get into our heads and almost erase who God made us to be. Sometimes they're big situations, sometimes they're smaller, more lighthearted moments. Years ago, the very first wedding that I ever did, which was a moment ago at this point, I had some friends that asked me to get married. Like, we're getting married, why don't you do the wedding? I'm like, I'm in. Like, we're going to Florida, it's gonna be on the beach, backdrop is the ocean. I'm like, I'm doubly in, this is gonna be amazing. And then my buddy goes, but you're gonna have to watch out for my grandma. She's not gonna like you. I'm like, oh, why? Well, she's a strong Catholic, she's German, so everything about her, she's just not gonna like you. I'm like, I'm winning her over. So we show up, and Grandma, or Oma, comes up to me, short little woman, strong German accent, grabs my shoulder, pulls me down so we're eye level, and she goes, you're not even old enough to be married. You're not a pastor. Why are you here? And then she kind of scurried off. Like, that'll put a little messaging in your head. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go do the ceremony now. But there are just moments in life, some because of other people's voices and messaging, and some because of painful experiences that you've gone through, that have the power to start to try to strip away the image that God has for you, the identity even that God has for you, the purpose that he has for you. But of all the things in life that have the power to do the most damage to the identity God has for us, you know as well as I do, which voice is it? Yeah, it's our own. It's the one right in between our ears. It's that voice that just plays right here, sometimes in the backdrop, and sometimes very much in the forefront of our minds. Like even that same wedding, so we're in the middle of the ceremony, and back then, this was my first wedding ever, so I had no clue what I was doing. I mean, I didn't know when vows came and rings came, and so I had, like I do a wedding now, I've got one 3x5 card on the front of my Bible with the order and the few things I'm gonna say. Then I had a dozen 3x5 cards. So there's one point I'm out there on the beach, and I'm like, yeah, okay, next, and I'm doing that thing, and then a gust of wind came. Yeah, every single 3x5 card down the beach. So I have this split second, like, what do I do? I literally didn't know what was next. I'm like, do I pronounce them now? Did we do the first kiss? I don't even know. So I ran after my cards. And then the best man ran with me. And then the groom ran with me. And we're all like scurrying down the beach. And so I come back, and here's the only messaging in my head. I am such a moron. Like that's going on in my head. Here's what's so cool is in the years to come, because this guy and his family are some of my dearest friends, so I become so close to their family as well, that became one of the most endearing parts of the whole ceremony. Like all these years later, I started to learn, like that's what people remember, and that's what they talk about. They're like, we loved that moment. I'm like, really? Because I felt like a buffoon in that moment. And that was the messaging in my head. You were such a buffoon. Like we are the worst voice at trying to strip away from ourselves the identity that God has for us. So what do we do about it? That's what I want to talk about for a couple minutes today. Last week, we talked about how to begin to step in to the identity God has, and how do we even combat the voices around us, but what do we do with the voices that are inside of us, in our own heads, that would lead us to be something different than God made us to be? So let me just pray, and we'll dive in. Father in heaven, I just ask that you would block out all the distractions that could potentially be here for us. Whether it's distractions that already occurred this morning, stress or anxiety, thoughts about this next week. God, maybe even tension rising up in the moment. There is a promise that you have made, God, that when we gather together specifically because we want to encounter you, that there's just a different way that your presence will hang in that place. And so here we are, and we don't want to go through motions, but God, we do want to encounter you. And so I pray that you would move and sweep, Holy Spirit, through the room, that you would grab hold of our hearts, our minds, and that you would speak in a way that only you can speak, and that you could be understood by us. That we would grasp something deeper and more meaningful about you, about us, about who you made us to be than before the day began. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so one of the things that we'll do before we go any further is we're gonna receive up our offering, which is, if you're new, if you're just checking out Kensington, or even especially church in general, this is such a key part of, honestly, not even just what it means for us to be a church, but our identity as a church. Like, just to be clear, these moments are not about bills and electricity needing to be kept on or salaries that get paid. This is about mission for us that comes out of identity. We really do believe when Jesus once taught his people how to pray, he said, in part of it, he said, here's how you should pray: your kingdom come and your will be done on this earth as what? You know what? As it is in heaven. And so part of our identity as followers of Jesus is we really do believe that what we do in this world is reflective of what God would have happen in eternity, in heaven, in the realm that we are not yet. And so this is one way, it's not every way, this is one way we get that done. We do it with our passion, we do it with our time, but we also do it with our resources. So as the buckets go down a row, if you could just pass it back to the row behind you, pass it back down. If you're the second row that got it, just go ahead and set it on the floor, and people will come by and collect it up. And just, again, appreciate you for all that you enable us to do as a community. So years ago, quick story, I was a youth pastor at a church. It's kind of what I started out doing in the church world. I worked with high school students, junior high students, and we had a pretty big group of both that started to grow fairly rapidly. We got several hundred kids at one point, and so we hit this season of time where we realized we needed to hire and get some more staff in to help out, because it was more than I could do bouncing between junior high and senior high and college even, and so we were looking to hire a junior high guy. So we did the whole process, and we started taking in applications, but as we were growing as a church as well, we realized it would probably be wise to default to an outside group, just to give us some advice, counsel, walk us through the process of interviewing candidates and assessing candidates. So we got one that we were pretty excited about, and we started to put him through the outside process. The thing is, I realized pretty quickly on, I had no clue what he was about to experience, because I had been on staff for a few years, so I was kind of grandfathered in. Like my process of hire was a senior guy sat down with me. He's like, "You're awesome." It's kind of like an Andrews moment, like our founder, if you know him. He just like put his arm around me. He's like, "You're amazing. Want a job?" I was like, "I think." He's like, "You're hired." I'm like, "Shouldn't you ask more questions?" So that was like how I got in. So I thought, maybe I should go through the process. That way, like I'm familiar with it, and I don't get the skip or the pass, and I know what to expect when we're taking candidates through this in the future. That was the dumbest decision I've ever made. Like when I went through the process, it did not turn out what I expected at all. So it's like 2 days, you go through multiple exams of personality stuff, you meet with job counselors, the whole thing culminates with a 45-minute session with a therapist that wraps it all together and then tells you basically, here's what I think you should do and what you're made to do and cut out to do. And so this guy comes walking in and he sits down, and this is how he starts. He goes, "I just want to let you know right off the bat, I'm not necessarily a religious man or a Christian." Okay. He says, "But obviously you are, so I'm glad that you believe that a higher power or God told you to do what you're doing." Like, oh boy. He says, "Because I don't see it." I was like, oh. He goes, we've worked with many pastors and many people in ministry positions, and they don't have your profile. And so he goes, "The only way I can explain that you do what you do is that you really believe God told you to do it." I'm like, okay, that'll really boost your confidence. And I'm like, well, do tell. What should I be doing? He's like, well, there's 4 things at the top of the list: law enforcement, military, politician, or lawyer. I'm like, so like, where does pastor fall? He's like, not on the list. I'm like, dang it. So then I'm sitting here thinking, I'm going to get fired from my job. And this guy's going to get it that I'm interviewing. But that'll, like, talk about messaging in your mind and in between your ears. Like, that put some messaging there for a while. Throughout the course of my life, the loudest, most damaging voice to stepping fully into the identity and the purpose that God has made me for has been my own. I just don't think I'm alone. I think we're all that way. I think for all of us, we know what it's like to have a voice on repeat in between our ears that is critical, that's condemning, that's damaging to who God has made us to be. A voice that when we give it real estate in our minds has the power to actually lead you entirely away from ever fully understanding who God made you to be or what it is he made you capable of. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is an account of a man over 3,000 years ago that this was exactly his experience, who had messaging in his ears and in his mind that was not who God made him to be. And yet as God encountered him, interacted with him, began to change that messaging, change the voice in his head, and even ultimately change the purpose that he thought his life was for. So I want to take us there. It's in the Old Testament book of Judges. If you have a Bible, I want you to open it up, chapter 6. If you don't, we put it all up on screen. But I just want to encourage you, as I do often, if you have a Bible, bring it. I think there's something powerful about actually having it in your hand. And I know we can look at it on the phone, look at it on your phone, that's no criticize. But if you have a physical Bible, I just encourage you to bring it. One of the things that's so important for me to do with this book is underline it, write in it. My Bibles are a mess. Like I literally can only keep them for about a year or two because they just get destroyed with comments and things in the margins that I can go back to and I can read, and moments that as I'm reading, God just really draws my attention to something. So then it gets, the underline or so I'm just passionate about this book, and I would hope that if you have one, you bring it, and you would use this thing so thoroughly that eventually you got to replace it. So Gideon, his story starts in Judges chapter 6, verse 1 goes this way. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in the mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and they ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. So literally these people, like they're camping right outside the Israelites so that they could see the moment you replace a cattle, we're coming and getting it. The moment we see evidence of new resource, we're coming and getting it. The moment we see a new sheep, that one's ours. Like that's why they're camped so close, because they're not gonna let Israel have anything. And as a result, they're decimating them as a nation. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land and they ravaged it. Midian was so impoverished, the Israelite people, that the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. And when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians. I delivered you from the hand of your oppressors. I even drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live." But then he says this to them, "You have not listened to me." So the first thing God does in response to Israel as they cry out to help is what any of you as a parent have a tendency to do in a good way, is in the moment that your kids make a mistake is remind them why they're in that place and then help them. Like your kid rides the bike off the porch, that's where you go, "This is why I told you we don't ride our bikes off the porch." But what do you do then? As a good parent, you immediately rush in and you help and you bandage and you take care of the wounds. This is God doing the same thing. As a good father, he's saying, all right, I just want to remind you, here's why you're in this place, because you don't have to be in this place, but now let me go to help you. Now, little context with Israel. They're not any different as a nation than you and I are as individuals. They have this very on-again, off-again type of relationship with God. Like where there's moments where it's all about him and life is good in those moments. It's peaceful, it's not perfect, but it's well. And then they have these off-again moments where it's all about them and it's not about him. They neglect him. They neglect who he's made them to be, how he's made them to live. And when that happens, everything falls apart. For the last 40 years, Israel has been in a time of peace. Life has been good. Not perfect, but good. But this is not that time. And so now they're at a time where they're in the off-again pattern, where they're it's all about me, it's all about me, it's what we want. And they start to ignore and disregard God, disregard who he's made them to be. As a result, everything begins to spiral out of control. Everything starts to break apart, from politically, morally, socially, financially, even nationally. That's why all these nations around them are moving in. Also in part because of the fact that they have no king. This is a time in their history where there's no one to stand up and say, all right, guys, we can get through this. Like, here's how we rally, and here's the vision, and here's where we're going. There is nobody like that. And so all these nations, and particularly the Midianite nation, begins to attack them and just take everything away from them, threatening to erode them. This is a season where a once incredibly powerful nation has become a mere remnant of who they used to be. And I think one of the things that's so important, like even to acknowledge at the onset of this account, is that I think most of human life is the experience of determining who it is you will give the authority to shape and direct your life. And what the Israelites have chosen at this moment is to give that authority to themselves, to take it back away from God. It's not really about what he wants. We're just going to decide for ourselves. And as a result, everything starts spiraling out of control. And so God goes in the next verse to this major scene change. So he sends a prophet, makes clear what's happening, but then God goes, again, like a good parent, he goes into, here's problem-solving mode. Here's what we're going to do. And here's what's interesting, and why this has everything to do with the idea of identity, is he's going to provide a solution for the people through what he does with one man to begin to change his identity from broken to who he is that God has made him to be. So if you look at the next verse, you're going to want to stay here because we're going to do this a little bit today, verse and then a few thoughts. Verse 11, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Bezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midians. So what do we make in a winepress? Not a trick question. Wine. Now this is a nation without resources. So I want you, first of all, to get an image in your mind of the scene that he's in. I literally had even thought about trying to get a hold of a wine barrel this week. I want to climb inside it and do like half of my message in the barrel. You'd be like, that is super weird. It would have super made the point though, because I want you to put yourself in this idea that he's in this wine press. Now, a wine press that does no longer make wine because there are no grapes, there are no resources. Why? Because the Midianites have taken them, is a filthy, smelly place to be. You ever smelled bad wine? It doesn't smell good. You ever tasted bad wine? It doesn't taste good. Like, this is a dirty place. It's a smelly place. Like, there's one reason and one reason alone you would choose to do the job of separating wheat and chaff in this place. It's because you're in hiding. So usually the job of trying to separate wheat from the chaff would be done not just in an open place, but in an airy place as well. Particularly in this region, a lot of this would have been done oftentimes on some kind of a hilltop where there would have been a breeze that would have, as you're kind of separating everything, it would have blown away a portion of the chaff in the breeze, doing a little bit of the work for you. So now you're in this confined area for one reason alone, because if you're in an outside area where the chaff is blowing away, who sees it? The Midianites. And what do? What they've been doing, which is the minute they see a resource that they haven't gotten their hands on, they go take it. So you have to understand, and this is what I want us to grasp, this Gideon, as he's in the wine press, he's hiding. That's the only reason he's there. This is not a guy with any aspiration to be the brave heart of his people. His only aspiration is, I want to get through the day with my head on my shoulders and a loaf of bread in my belly. That's it. I just want to make it through the day. And yet God comes to him. He doesn't go to the elite. Now, this is a scattered remnant, but there are still people that would have been military, that would have been leaders, that would have been politicians, that would have been more wealthy at one point. He doesn't go to any of them. He shows up to this scared little coward of a man that's hiding in a wine press. And that's who he chooses to use, as he will reshape his identity to also free an entire nation. You go to the next verse, and here's part of what he says to him. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said to him, "The Lord is with you," and then say what he calls him. Mighty warrior. This is not a mighty warrior. Like, you don't show up to the guy hiding in the wine press and say, "You are the Arnold Schwarzenegger of your people." And so there's a couple reasons he may do this. One is to maybe poke fun at him, right? Maybe God's just like, "Hey there, tough guy." Like, he could, not really the heart of God as I read it through the Bible. There's groups of people called commentators. They try to give context to the Bible, make sense of different places in the Bible. A lot of times they're super helpful to read. Every now and then they're a little too smart for their own good, and they try to make a point where there isn't a point, where things are just more obvious. I read one commentator, and this is what he says about why God called him mighty warrior. He says, God observed how it was that Gideon threshed with all of his might. And so he saw a man that was both diligent and strong. I'm like, come on, dude. That's not at all it. And like, nobody's ever seen somebody kicking a box of cornflakes and been like, Norman Schwarzkopf. Like, that's not it. Like, he's not looking at him going, look at the way he hits that wheat on the ground, man, you are UFC ready. Like, that's just not what's happening. And here's the point, and why it's so important to acknowledge that, is that in the moment that God shows up and he says to the scared, cowering man, mighty warrior, it has nothing to do with anything he sees him presently engaging in, and everything to do with who he sees him becoming. He says, you will be my mighty warrior. Now, what's so important to remember, too, is the significance of naming people in this culture and the difference from our culture. Your name in this time wasn't just merely a way to reference you or identify you. It wasn't just who you were. It was what you were. It was what you would do. You know, Gideon's name, it literally means thresher, like one who's good only for gathering debris. Like, it's kind of like what he's doing right now. He's really just, in a way, living out his name. And so part of what God does is he comes to him first and he says, no, I'm actually going to change that name to change your identity. It would be in a lot of ways like trying to understand the naming significance difference between that culture and our culture. I've got a daughter whose name is Jocelyn. If I would have named her Perm and then pointed her towards a life as a hairstylist, like that's what we're talking about. Your name is not just who you are. It's literally what you do. Even my wife and I, years ago, we went to Cedar Point when we were dating. And by the way, if you go to Cedar Point with your significant other, and you dress the same outfit, don't. So we didn't do that, but what we did do that we thought would be super cute that day is there was this booth at Cedar Point that was like giving people their names on a plaque. Like you could go give me your name and here's what your name means. And I'm like, oh, that would be so cute. And we could hang it on the wall forever when we get married. It could be Craig and Nicole and our names. Well, we went there and her name, Nicole, so huge, like a whole page is filled up. Victor of the people, champion of the people, beautiful warrior, princess. I'm not kidding, right? Like it's all this language. And so I'm like, ooh, what's mine gonna be? And so then this is literally what it said. Craig from near the crag. Like, what? So a crag is just an Irish term for creek. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, dude, I'm paying for this. Like, lie to me. I don't care. Like, I give you money for that. It's like, nope, that's all my sheet of paper said, from near the crag. I'm like, but here's what I didn't go do. I didn't run off after that and decide to go buy a van and live down by the river like Chris Foley. I'm like, no, it's just my life, I guess. No, that wasn't what I did. Why? Because naming is a little bit different. Now, we name with purpose, we name with meaning, but a name carries so much more. And here's this scared little man whose name indicates nothing about what he would be able to do to help and to free his people. And God shows up to him and says, no, you will be my mighty warrior. Even though naming is different now than it was then, you and I all know what it's like to have a name, to have a sense of identity that will never show up on your birth certificate, but when you give it real estate, has the power to entirely misshape who God has made you to be. Names that some of you have tried to work against your entire life. Names like stupid, worthless, dirty, broken, never gonna amount to much, failure. There's all kinds of names that have the power to shape us beyond just the names that we have been given. And the first thing that God does with this man is he shows up and he begins to rename him so he can change his identity, so he can change his purpose. Next set of verses are interesting because Gideon isn't really having it. Verse 13, his response to the mighty warrior moment is, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all of his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." It's interesting to me that when God says to him, you're going to be a mighty warrior now, notice he doesn't even acknowledge it. He's not like, oh, really? Tell me more. Here's what he does. The only thing he acknowledges in the moment is what's happening in his land around him, is the devastation of his people, the devastation of his own family, his own life. All he acknowledges is the pain that he's in being evidence that God can't certainly be for them. So how in the world then could I even begin to acknowledge that there's an identity God has for me, because the pain I'm in tells me God's not even with me. And one of the things I think is so important to acknowledge is that for you and I, it's not that dissimilar. Pain has a way of convincing you that God's not with you and making you miss then who he's made you. Instead of realizing that God is so amazingly sovereign and beautiful that he can take the worst of situations and actually redeem them and repurpose them. He can use them. And so that's what he begins to do with Gideon, not just change his identity, but change his very purpose. Here's what he says to him next. The Lord returned to him and then said to him, "You are to go on the strength that you have and to save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not the one sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." And then the Lord answered him, and this is where we'll end because it's so key. "I will be with you." So you've got this moment where God says, here's who you are, and I'm going to change your identity, to change your purpose. And he wrestles with him even. He's like, yeah, I don't know, God. You know who you're talking to, right? Because my family, kind of not really anything special in the neighborhood. And even in my family, I'm kind of at the lowest end of the totem pole of my family. So really, God, I'm the least of the least of the least of the least. And so even as God begins to speak new identity over him, he's wrestling with whether or not he can truly believe this and embrace it and step towards it. The incredible thing is God does this all throughout history, not just in the Bible, but I believe it's part of the work he does in our lives. He did it last week we looked at Paul, who was Saul. And God encountered him and changed his name from Saul to Paul. You know what Paul means? Humble. And literally, God, as he showed up to him, humbled him in an incredible way. And it was out of that position of being humbled that Paul probably became one of the most important people, if not the most, in the development of the early church. Peter, whose name was Simon. And then Jesus changed it to Peter. Peter means the rock. And literally, he ends up becoming the foundation that God builds the entire church off of. Like, talk about being the rock. He was the rock that was the foundation. And then Gideon, from being no good for anything but gathering brush and dead debris to mighty warrior. And that's exactly what God does with him in the next several pages, is he leads him to actually step into that identity and gather his people, mount forces, and drive the Midianites out of their land and lead the whole nation back into making life all about God and no longer about them, and leads them back into a new rhythm of experience with him. But what I love about it too is it's very human. Because it wasn't just like a one and done moment. It wasn't like God said, you're a mighty warrior, and then he just lived out this new identity for the rest of his days. I mean, even in the moment, he's fighting him. He's like, I'm kind of the least of the least. Are you sure? Like, he's resisting it. Later on, if you keep reading, there's a moment where he starts making some of the decisions necessary to lead his people back to God, but he does it at night when no one else is around because he's doing it in fear. He's afraid of what people are going to think of him, what they're going to say about him, how they're going to treat him. So what I love is the humanity in this, that he's still battling with it, just like you and I do. Like, nobody steps fully into the identity God has for him, and that's just it for the rest of your life. There's a tension, there's a wrestle, there's a battle. But as God continues to be with him, as he promised, he leads him through an experience of replacing the messaging in his head. Where instead of Gideon's voice, but God, I'm the least of the least. What grows is God's voice. No. You're my mighty warrior. So 3,000 plus years ago, what in the world does his story have to do with our story, stepping into a fuller identity of who God's made us? A couple handles I want to give you for the morning. Number one is I think it's important that you and I define what the wine press is that we have a tendency to hide in. All of us hide our insecurities in different ways. We hide as a result of the messaging in our heads. Some of us hide behind an ego and just kind of posturing up. Some of us hide behind trying to create an outward body image appearance that hides our inward insecurity. Some of us try to hide between our accomplishments and our job, kind of our chest pounding, look how much I've done, how high I've climbed. Sometimes we try to hide just through flat out lies. Sometimes we try to hide through keeping people at a distance. This is where we live with shallow relationships. It's where people may be around you, but nobody really knows you, not the real you. Like, there's not a human being alive that doesn't have some form of a wine press that you have a tendency to go back to and hide in out of your insecurity. And if God is to really do his work to form his identity in you, who he made you to be and the purpose that comes out of that, the first thing you gotta do is you've gotta get honest. Like, I've spent many years in front of several counselors just to try to get to a place of honesty with what some of my own wine press hiding is. Like, the places I go to, the behaviors I default to, the methods I use to try and create an image for people that isn't always the real me. So what is the wine press that you have a tendency to go to? Because until you acknowledge it, I don't know how God calls us out of it, because you'll just keep ignoring his call out of it while hiding in the wine press. But the second thing I think we've got to do as well is we have to watch for where it is that God forms our identity and then join him in that work. There's a lot of different ways that I think God does his work to form his identity in us and who he made us to be. But a couple that are key in this passage. Number one is just in his presence. And this is true for all of us. That's why even last week I said we have got to be people that this next year, if this book isn't a regular part of your routine, we've got to figure out how to make it different this year. Because in this book is where you don't just read stories, you actually encounter God. And you will encounter some of the ways that he wants to reshape you. It is part of what draws us into the presence of God. Not the only thing, but it's a significant tool. And this is why God even said to Gideon, after all of his last complaint, but I'm the least of the least of the least of the least, God's like, hey, pause. I will be with you. And as long as Gideon continued to be with God, God had the ability to reshape his identity. So one of the things that's so critical for us as we go into this next year, I think, how do you create space to be with him? Because I'm telling you, he wants to be with you. He's with you. He's right there. Remember what I said? You can't outrun the light. He's always in pursuit of you. So how are you turning around to be in pursuit of him? But I also think another place that we have to acknowledge that God does a lot of his good identity-forming work is in community, is in relationship. You know the one thing that wasn't in the wine press with Gideon? Other people. When you and I are living out of an identity less than what God made us for, we have a tendency to keep people at a distance. That's why we say it all the time here. The most significant thing about being a part of Orion will never be Sunday morning. It's important, it's valuable, but it will never be the most significant part. The most significant part will be when we get in one another's lives, when you're known and you know. The greatest work that God has done in my life over 40-some years of living has been in the context of me being in other people's lives and them being in mine, like real relationships. And you can't trust every part of who you are to everybody, but you better have some people that you are walking with in this life towards Jesus, and watch how God in community does his best work. That's why when we end this morning, we're gonna do what Shar talked about earlier and encourage you towards these tables, if you're not in community, to start to take steps to get in community. That's not just because we need to fill up rosters, that's because we believe God does his best identity-forming work when we're in relationship with other people. He also does it through pain. Part of what God does here in the life of Gideon is he doesn't cause the pain, but he redeems it. He uses the pain of the people, the nation, and Gideon, and he uses that pain in Gideon's life as part of the catalyst to transform his identity and ultimately his very purpose. One of the things we say often here at Kensington is never underestimate the pain in the room. That in any given room, particularly in a size like this, there's a lot of pain. One of the most incredible things about Jesus is he does not let your pain be wasted. He doesn't do it, but he redeems it. And when we're in a place of pain, we can so often and so naturally and understandably just run from him. But if you will run to him, you will find that so often your moments of pain become some of the most defining, formative moments of your life. I would also say this. Out of Gideon's story, we need to ask God to make sure that his voice is the loudest one in our head. There's a lot of voices in our head. And I think sometimes we allow other voices to be louder than his. One place the Apostle Paul writes this, I want you to hear it because he talks about what it is that we allow to govern our thoughts. Those who live according to the flesh have their mind set on the flesh and what it desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. I would just ask you, what voice governs your mind? Is it your own? Is it your bosses? Is it your neighbors? Is it your spouses? Is it your children's? Is it your parents from growing up? Is it a voice from years ago? Like all of us have voices that govern our minds. And for so many of us, they're the wrong voice, which lead to the wrong identity. But when it's God's voice that governs your mind, it's life and peace. The only way I know to let his voice govern my mind is to constantly ask, God, let your voice be louder than any other voice. And then this is the last one I'd give you. This is kind of a bonus point. When you and I have stepped out of the wine press and we have started to step into the identity God has for us, do you know one of the jobs that we have, that we get to do, is to lovingly, graciously, tenderly call others out of the wine press and into who God made them to be as well. One of the greatest dangers I constantly see with the church is people that start stepping out of their wine press into who God made them to be. They're growing in their relationship with Jesus, growing in their identity with Christ. And you know what so often happens? Suddenly we begin to posture up. We stand on this platform of like varsity level and condemn anybody still in the press. Because when you're living in the wine press, what did I say? It's dirty, it's stinky, it's not who God made you to be. And I see way too many Christians these days that love, as God's doing his work to transform them, condemning and criticizing people still in the wine press instead of loving them, being gracious to them, and compassionately saying, God has so much more. So calling them out, but not condemning them in it, but calling them out of it. Why? Because you were once in it as well. And you know what? If you're anything like me, you have a tendency too often to return to it. But far too many Christians stand in a place of judgment over other people that they deem still in the press, while God is doing the same work in their life that he longs to do in others. May the church be the most gracious, compassionate, tender voice to say to humanity, God has more. Not to condemn humanity, not to criticize, but to call out of the winepress. So here's what we want to do as we close it today is we have all these tables around the room. And one of the things that we just know, it's human nature. When you walk out of the room, you got places to go, you got things to get done, and you've got a full day, I'm sure. And so we just hit the hall and go to the doors. And so what we would ask and we would hope is that before you walk out of the room, you would take a minute and you'd circle the room. And you'd go explore some of these tables. Some of you are in groups. Some of you are in multiple groups. Some of you are the kind of people, you're in like 10 groups. Do not add another group. That's not even sane. But some of you are in no community right now. And I would just challenge you before you leave this room, even if you don't sign up for anything, explore it. Go to the sides over here, go to the back over here. We've got different categories of interest groups and growth groups and groups to get you more acquainted with the Bible. Like, look at the different groups and just consider, if you're not in community, beginning to step into one of the most significant places that God actually does his identity forming work. And then as you walk out this morning, when you finally go, I don't know if you saw it or somebody told you about it when you got here today, but in the hallway, there is a giant cross that you'll probably already seen. People are starting to put fingerprints on. Your fingerprints are obviously one of the most identifiable things about you, uniquely about you. And so we're trying to create something that next week is going to have its fullest explanation, but would love before you leave is to hit that before you go, get your ink on your thumb or your hand or a finger, and just make a print on there as a way of us saying we want to be people whose identity is found in Christ, and then that's going to come back next week as part of how we wrap up the whole series. So I'm going to go ahead and close. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to just ask, if you're not leaving the room, take a few minutes to stay back, explore community, and see what place might be the right place for you to plug in. God, I just want to say thank you for your words, for moments and stories, for accounts like Gideon that you have been so gracious across time and space to allow us to look into and watch how you work in people's lives, how you did work because it's how you still work. And so would you do your good work in us as people to continue to draw us into the identity, into the purpose that you made us for. In Jesus' name, amen. So glad y'all were with us today. Take a minute, explore community, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Welcome back, everybody.
What a great
service. Absolutely. Yeah. I'll do my takeaway.
Yeah.
How about that? We'll do mine. Just a takeaway, just talking through who and what are you giving authority to speak into your identity and your purpose in your life. And I really appreciate that. I know all of us through different things in different stages of life, right? Yeah. You speak into your identity based on just where you're at or what you're even doing, right? In your career, who you are, what stage of life you're at. You're a single person, you're married, you have kids now, and you speak into those identities. But who are you based on what God says about you? Which is, I love the story of Gideon. So, What about you?
Yeah, I would just add to that, and I would say, a lot of times we find our identity in things that of this world, right, and not of God. So what does it look like to refocus ourselves, especially as we're in this new year, and prioritize spending time with God first, so that our identity comes from Him. Yeah,
you have to spend time with Him and know what He says about you in order for you to know who you are.
Yeah.
And where you're going. So the purpose for your life, that's great. And then on the topic of groups, love that. We can do this in community. We have to do this in community. If we don't have each other, we don't get where we're going without each other. So you can jump onto kensingtonchurch.org/groups to find a place where you connect and have those relationships to strengthen yourself as well as strengthen those around you. For families, for single people, for college age, whatever that is, or even for high school.
Yeah.
For instance, tonight we meet. If you are a parent of a middle schooler or high school, we have students that meet tonight. Or if you are yourself in middle school or high school, middle school meets at 5 o'clock here at the Orion building, and then high school meets at 6:30.
Yeah.
So we would love to have you guys out, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Yep, sounds good. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.